For 4 years, a scar 440 miles long ran across Europe. Millions of men lived inside it. This is not a film about generals or battles. This is about what it was actually like to live down there. The trenches were never meant to last. In 1914, both armies dug in for a few weeks. They stayed for 4 years. What began as a ditch became a city. Front line, support line, reserve line, connected by communication trenches running miles to the rear. Trenches were never straight. They zigzagged in short sections, so a single shell or a single enemy could never sweep the whole line. The front wall was the parapet, the rear the parados. A fire step let you see over and made you a target the moment you did. Beyond the parapet lay no man's land, sometimes a mile wide, sometimes close enough to hear the other side talking. Belts of barbed wire ran in front of every line, dozens of yards deep. Repairing it was a job done only in darkness. Down in the earth, men carved out dugouts, some a shallow scrape, some German shelters 30 feet deep with beds and electric light. And in this world, an ordinary infantryman spent his days, but probably not the way you imagine. The myth is that men lived in the front line for years. They didn't. They rotated. A typical cycle, a few days in the front line, a few in support, a few in reserve, then out to rest, then back. The day began before dawn with stand to. Every man on the fire step, rifle ready, staring into the dark because dawn was when attacks came. They stood there in silence as the light came up. It was called the morning hate, and both sides did it every single day. Then, incredibly, breakfast, bacon, tea, and rum. And on quiet mornings, both sides ate in an unspoken truce. Then came the real work, not fighting, digging, repairing, draining, carrying, endlessly. Trench walls collapsed constantly. Rain, shellfire, and simple gravity meant a trench had to be rebuilt almost as fast as it was dug. Then sentry duty, 2 hours staring through a periscope at an empty landscape, fighting the one enemy that never let up, exhaustion. Falling asleep on sentry duty was a capital offense. Men chewed tobacco, pinched themselves, and stood in freezing water to stay awake. Most of what happened in a trench happened at night, because in daylight, moving anywhere near the parapet could get you killed. Ration parties, wiring parties, stretcher parties, patrols. The trench came alive after dark and went silent at dawn. And here is the truth that surprises people most. The thing that killed and broke the most men in the trenches was not gunfire. It was water. Trenches in Flanders were dug into land barely above sea level. Dig 2 feet, and you hit groundwater. Men stood in freezing water for days. Their feet swelled, went numb, turned black. They called it trench foot. 20,000 British soldiers were treated for it in a single winter. The army's answer: whale oil, dry socks, and inspections. Then the rats. Millions of them, grown fat and fearless, some the size of cats. They ran across sleeping men's faces. Men hunted them with clubs, bayonets, and bets. They never made a dent. A single pair of rats could produce 900 offspring in a year. And the lice. Every man was infested. They bred in the seams of uniforms and never, ever went away. They ran candles along the seams to burn the eggs. It worked for a day. The itching was constant, maddening, and universal. Lice carried trench fever, a crippling illness that put men out of action for weeks. It caused around 1/5 of all British sickness cases. Then the smell, latrines, chloride of lime, cordite, stagnant water, unwashed men. Veterans said it was the thing they never forgot. And in winter, the cold. Water froze in canteens. Rifle bolts seized. Men slept standing up because lying down meant lying in ice. Mud was its own enemy. In the worst sectors, it was deep enough to swallow a man whole, and it was not always possible to pull him out. The trenches killed men slowly, with cold and water and disease, long before the enemy ever got the chance. And yet, men survived, not because they were fearless, but because of the small things that made them still feel like people. Food, above all. Bully beef, hard biscuits, plum and apple jam. Monotonous, often cold, and endlessly complained about. Tea was sacred, even when it tasted of petrol from the cans it was carried in. And the rum ration was, for many, the day's high point. And letters, millions of them. The post reached the front line in as little as 2 days, the single greatest morale weapon of the war. Men wrote home constantly and censored themselves. They described the mud and the food, almost never the fear. Parcels from home meant chocolate, cigarettes, socks, and newspapers, and were shared out among the whole section without question. They filled the empty hours with cards, football, singing, and jokes so black that only another soldier would understand them. They ran their own trench newspapers, mocking the generals, the food, and the war itself. Humor was not a distraction. It was a defense. And they clung to each other. The section, 8 or 10 men, became a family closer than any they had known at home. Because in the trenches, men did not fight for king or country. They fought so they wouldn't let down the man standing next to them. And then, without warning, the world would end. Artillery caused around 60% of all casualties. You could not fight it. You could not see it coming. You could only wait. Bombardments could last for days. Men emerged deafened, shaking, unable to speak. The army called it shell shock, and at first refused to believe in it. Snipers watched the parapet every hour of daylight. To raise your head above the sandbags for 3 seconds was to gamble your life. And in April 1915, a new horror drifted across no man's land. A low yellow-green cloud, heavier than air, rolling into the trenches. Gas rarely killed in large numbers, but it terrified, blinded, and burned, and it meant a man could never take off his mask in time. Gas alarms were rattles, gongs, and empty shell cases hit with a bayonet. Men had 6 seconds to get their masks on. And then there were raids, small parties crossing no man's land at night with clubs and knives, to take prisoners and terrify. And once or twice a year the order came, fix bayonets, ladders against the parapet, and the whistle. They climbed the ladders and walked into the open, and the trench they left behind fell completely, utterly silent. The average British soldier spent perhaps 15% of his war in the front line, but it was the 15% he never escaped. They went home changed, deafened, arthritic, sleepless, carrying a war that they mostly refused to talk about. The trenches themselves were filled in, and the fields plowed. Farmers still turn up shells, buttons and bones every single year. We remember the battles, but most of trench life wasn't battle. It was cold, wet, boredom, and the extraordinary endurance of ordinary men. They held that line in that mud for 4 years, not for glory, just to get through one more day and to stand beside each other.